Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Emily thought it was just another quiet morning in Willow Creek until her son doubled over in pain and everything unraveled. A desperate race to the hospital, a ruthless HOA president with a clipboard, and a mother forced to choose between rules and her child's life. The Harper family had always found comfort in the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, a neatly kept HOA-managed neighborhood just outside of Dallas, Texas. David Harper, a 35-year-old systems administrator, had bought the house with his wife Emily 3 years ago, drawn by the clean streets, manicured lawns, and a sense of community that came with the place. Though the HOA had its strict rules, the Harpers were never the type to cause trouble. They paid their dues on time, showed up for neighborhood meetings, and even hosted the occasional barbecue. Life in Willow Creek had been, for the most part, peaceful. David worked from an office downtown while Emily, 33, stayed home on leave from her job as a nurse to take care of their 7-year-old son, Oliver. Their days were quiet, their routines familiar. Emily enjoyed her garden. Oliver rode his bike on the sidewalk under her watchful eye. Even the HOA president, Karen Miller, a stern woman with a clipboard seemingly fused to her hand, wasn't much of a concern. She was intense, yes, and had a reputation for being controlling. But David and Emily kept things tidy and never gave her a reason to intervene. That all changed one Thursday morning. David was already at work, hunched over code with headphones in, when Emily noticed something wasn't right with Oliver. He clutched his stomach with both hands and whimpered, his face pale and sweaty. His usual boundless energy was gone. Within minutes, he was doubled over, crying out in pain. Emily's nurse instincts kicked in. This wasn't just a stomach bug. This could be appendicitis. She grabbed her keys, scooped up Oliver, and rushed him to the car. As she pulled out of the driveway, her thoughts raced. She had no time to wait for an ambulance. The nearest hospital was 10 minutes away, and she could get him there faster herself. Heart pounding, she gripped the wheel and drove through the neighborhood at 30 miles per hour, twice the posted speed limit of 15. She barely noticed the security cameras perched on light poles or the judgmental eyes behind manicured hedges. Her only focus was Oliver, now curled up in the back seat, moaning in pain. By the time she reached the hospital and handed him over to the ER staff, she was shaking. After a tense conversation with the doctors, she learned he needed emergency surgery. But before she could fully process it, she remembered she had left Oliver's essentials at home. His stuffed dinosaur, his insurance papers, his overnight clothes. Without thinking twice, she got back in the car and sped toward home, unaware that Karen Miller had already set her sights on her. As Emily pulled into her driveway, gravel crunching beneath the tires, she barely had time to put the car in park before she saw her standing there. Karen Miller, dressed in her usual beige slacks and HOA-branded windbreaker, arms crossed, lips tight. She looked like she'd been waiting. Emily didn't even have the car door fully open before Karen strode up, waving a printed photo in one hand and her phone in the other. "I need to speak with you immediately," Karen barked, her voice sharp and rehearsed. "You were seen driving at 30 miles an hour through Willow Creek. That's double the posted limit. Double! You've endangered residents and violated HOA traffic regulations. Section 14, B.3 to be exact." Emily, still breathless from the hospital dash, blinked in disbelief. "Karen, not now. Please. My son, he's at the hospital. He needs surgery. I just came back to grab his things. I'll pay the fine or whatever later, but I need to get back." But Karen wasn't listening. Her eyes were lit with the righteous glow of authority, and she stepped in closer. "Excuses won't get you out of this, Mrs. Harper. Just because your child is sick doesn't give you the right to endanger the rest of this community. These cameras," she held up her phone, shaking it slightly, "don't lie. We have you on video speeding recklessly. HOA policy requires immediate disciplinary action." Emily tried to move past her, but Karen stepped directly into her path. When Emily attempted to sidestep again, Karen reached out and grabbed her by the forearm with surprising strength. "You will listen to me," Karen hissed, "and acknowledge your violation. Ignoring this will only make things worse." Emily's breath hitched as panic surged. The thought of Oliver lying alone in a hospital bed while she was being detained on her own property made her heart race. "Let go of me," she said, trying to pull her arm free. "I don't have time for this, Karen. My son, he could be in surgery by now. I need to go inside and get his things." But Karen clung tighter, her grip vice-like. You think you're above the rules because your kid has a tummy ache, she sneered. You're not special. You don't get a free pass to put lives at risk. Let me go, Emily shouted, yanking her arm hard enough to make Karen stumble. For a second, it looked like Karen might back off, but then her expression twisted into something darker. Oh, so now you're assaulting me, she said, pulling a small canister from her jacket pocket with a flourish. Before Emily could react, Karen lifted the pepper spray and discharged it straight into her face. A searing burn hit Emily's eyes and nose like wildfire. She screamed and fell to her knees on the front lawn, clawing at her face, sobbing from the pain. The world turned red and white, heat and agony. Karen stood over her, triumphant, a smug smile curling on her lips. That, she said coldly, was self-defense. You attacked a representative of the HOA. Consider this a citizen's reprimand. Emily sobbed, blind and trembling, her hands desperately trying to wipe away the pain, the bile of injustice rising in her throat. Her vision was too blurred to see anything, but she could hear Karen chuckling under her breath, the unmistakable sound of someone enjoying their perceived power. It was in this moment, cruel, chaotic, and surreal, that David's car skidded to a stop in front of the house. David barely remembered pulling into the driveway. Only the gut-wrenching image seared into his mind. His wife, crumpled on the lawn, clutching her face in agony, sobbing uncontrollably. His first instinct was to leap from the car, heart hammering in his chest. He dropped his phone somewhere between the seat and the gravel as he ran toward her. "Emily! Emily!" he shouted, falling to his knees beside her. Her skin was flushed red, eyes swollen shut, tears streaming as she gasped for breath. "She sprayed me," Emily cried hoarsely. "That psycho sprayed me with pepper spray. My eyes, David, I can't see." David's head snapped toward the figure standing above them. Karen Miller, smug as ever, arms crossed like she had just delivered neighborhood justice, gave him the kind of look one might give a teenager caught sneaking out after curfew. "She assaulted me," Karen said coldly, voice high with feigned authority. "I had every right to defend myself." She raised her voice and became aggressive. "You people think you're untouchable just because you smile at meetings." David surged to his feet. "You did what?" His voice dropped an octave, shaking with fury. "You sprayed my wife? You laid hands on her?" She was out of control, Karen sniffed, yelling, resisting HOA enforcement. "And now your tone is bordering on threatening. I'm warning you." "I'm warning you," David growled, stepping between her and Emily. "Get off my property now." Karen's face curled in mock offense. "Excuse me, this isn't over. I have authority here. She assaulted me first. I am within my rights as HOA president to issue a fine, demand an apology, and report this as a violent incident." David looked at Emily, who was rocking in pain, whispering through clenched teeth, "I just wanted to get Oliver's things." At that, something snapped in him. Karen opened her mouth to continue, but before she could spit out another bureaucratic threat, David stepped forward and shoved her back, hard enough to knock her slightly off balance. "You're done here, Karen," he said, voice low and seething. "You're not touching my wife again. You're not standing on this lawn another second." Karen stumbled and gasped dramatically, hand diving into her jacket again. "That's assault. Assault on an official," she cried, fishing blindly for her pepper spray. But David was faster. With one swift move, he snatched the canister from her hand and hurled it across the lawn. Karen froze, genuinely shocked. For the first time since their arrival in Willow Creek, David saw something new in her face. Fear. Real, unfiltered fear. "You're insane," he said, towering over her. "If you ever come near my wife again, I swear to God." Karen took a step back, her voice losing its edge. "You're in serious trouble. I'm calling the police. You people are dangerous. Please do." David spat. "And tell them exactly what you did." Karen hesitated, glanced down at Emily still on the grass, then at David's blazing eyes. Without another word, she turned and briskly marched away, heels clacking on the sidewalk like gunshots. David turned back to his wife, gently helping her up. "Come on, Em, let's get you inside." He led her carefully into the house, guiding her past the front door and into the bathroom. He ran water into a bowl and soaked a towel, gently pressing it to her eyes as she whimpered. "I can't believe she did that," Emily whispered, trembling. "All because I was trying to get Oliver's stuff." David leaned his forehead against hers for a second, swallowing back his rage. "We're not letting this go," he said quietly. "Not this time." They packed a bag with Oliver's things, his insurance card, pajamas, the stuffed dinosaur he never slept without. Emily winced from the residual sting in her eyes, but she stood tall. As they stepped out the door, a voice called out to them from across the street. It was Rick Benson, their elderly neighbor, standing on his porch with a camcorder in hand. "I saw the whole thing," Rick said gravely. "Got it all on video." David exhaled slowly. "Thank you, Rick. You might have just saved us." David helped Emily into the car, still holding the cool towel gently against her swollen eyes. She winced with every blink, but she refused to let the pain slow her down. They had no time. Oliver needed them. As they pulled out of the driveway, Rick Benson stepped off his porch and approached the window. "I don't mean to hold you up," Rick said, glancing between the couple with concern. "But I thought you should know. I've already backed up the footage from my porch camera and my handheld. Shows everything." Karen grabbing Emily, refusing to let go, spraying her without provocation. David looked at him, stunned. "You got all of that?" Rick nodded solemnly. "Every second. And you two aren't the first she's harassed. Most of the neighbors are too scared to speak up. But after what I saw today, she crossed a line." David reached through the window and shook Rick's hand firmly. "Thank you. You have no idea how much this means to us." "You take care of your boy," Rick said. "We'll handle the rest later." With that, they drove off toward the hospital, silence settling between them, except for the soft hum of the engine and the occasional sniffle from Emily. The moment they reached the emergency entrance, David raced inside with the bag. Oliver was still in surgery, but the nurses updated them. Things were going smoothly. The doctors were confident. Emily was taken aside to be treated. The ER staff quickly realized she had been pepper sprayed and guided her to an exam room, flushing her eyes and applying soothing treatments. The nurse asked what had happened, and when Emily explained, the room went silent. "And this happened in your own front yard?" the nurse asked, visibly disturbed. Emily nodded. "While I was trying to get my son's things." Hours passed, but finally Oliver came out of surgery. The doctor assured them the operation had been successful. The appendix had indeed ruptured, but they'd caught it in time. He would need to stay under observation for a few days, but he would recover fully. Relief washed over them like a wave. For the first time all day, Emily smiled, tired, puffy-eyed, but genuine. David held her hand tightly, not letting go. Later that night, as they returned home under the cover of twilight, Emily sank into the couch, exhausted. David stood at the kitchen counter, staring down at his phone. "I talked to an attorney," he said finally. "Lauren Gray, property rights and personal injury specialist. I told her what happened, sent her Rick's footage. She says we have a solid case, criminal and civil." Emily looked up. Her voice was steady. "Let's do it. I don't care how long it takes. She's not getting away with this." David nodded. "Lauren's drafting the complaint tonight. We'll have it in court by morning." For the first time since the nightmare began, they felt a shift, not just in their home, but in the neighborhood. Karen Miller had ruled Willow Creek for years through intimidation and self-importance. But that night, with a lawyer on their side and a community starting to stir, the Harpers realized they might finally be able to fight back. The next morning dawned deceptively calm. Sunlight filtered through the blinds of the Harper home, casting warm light across the floor as David sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and reviewing the final draft of the legal complaint Lauren Gray had sent overnight. Emily, still recovering from the chemical burns to her eyes, was resting upstairs, while Oliver remained in stable condition at the hospital. It finally felt like they had taken control of the situation. That illusion shattered with 3 sharp knocks at the door. David opened it to find Karen Miller standing on the front porch with a tight, artificial smile stretched across her face, and flanking her on either side were 2 large men, both dressed in black polos and tactical boots, arms folded across their chests. Karen looked like she was staging an arrest. "Good morning," she said, saccharine venom lacing her words. "We're here to resolve some outstanding issues, Mr. Harper." David's expression hardened. "Get off my property, Karen. I'm not playing games with you." "Oh, I think you will," she replied, stepping forward. The 2 men followed, pushing David back slightly as they crossed the threshold. "You see, your wife assaulted me yesterday, and you physically shoved an HOA officer and stole her personal defense device. That's assault and theft." I have every right to place you under citizen's arrest." One of the goons suddenly lunged, grabbing David's wrist and twisting it behind his back. The other clamped down on his shoulder, pinning him in place before he could react. David struggled, caught between confusion and fury. "What the hell are you doing?" "Let go of me." Karen leaned in close, face inches from his. "I'm giving you one final chance to cooperate. You owe the HOA $3,000 for the traffic violation, and I'm seeking an additional $10,000 in personal damages for the trauma I endured at your hands." "You're insane," David growled through clenched teeth. "This is illegal. You can't just show up here with thugs and extort money." Karen smiled. "Then let's take it to court. But trust me, sweetheart, my lawyers will bury you. Unless, of course, you decide to make this easy." Suddenly, the front door creaked open behind them. Emily stepped out onto the porch, her eyes still puffy, but now filled with fire. In her hand was something small, silver, and familiar, the same pepper spray canister Karen had used on her just a day earlier. "Let him go," Emily said, voice trembling but deadly. Karen turned, laughing. "Oh, please, what are you going to do?" Psst. The spray hit both men square in the face. One of them yelped and stumbled backward off the porch. The other screamed, releasing David and clawing at his eyes as he fell against the siding. Emily didn't hesitate. She turned the nozzle toward Karen and sprayed again. Karen shrieked, stumbling back, hands flailing. "You crazy woman! You assaulted me again!" David was already moving, grabbing Emily by the arm and dragging her back into the house. He slammed the door shut, bolted it, then shoved a chair under the handle for good measure. Outside, chaos erupted. Karen pounded on the door, screaming incoherently about arrests, lawsuits, and federal offenses. One of the men recovered enough to kick at the front steps, while the other, red-faced and blinded, staggered around the yard yelling curses. Then came the sound of breaking glass. A window on the side of the house shattered, and David saw one of the men trying to crawl through. Emily grabbed the phone and dialed 911. "Yes, we're being attacked," she said quickly. "They broke into our yard. One of them just smashed a window. We need police here now. It's Karen Miller, the HOA president, and 2 men. Yes, we have video evidence. Please hurry." Minutes felt like hours, but the wail of approaching sirens finally cut through the chaos. Red and blue lights flashed against the walls as multiple squad cars skidded to a stop in front of the house. Officers poured out, shouting commands. Karen and the men froze mid-chaos, caught in the middle of their tantrum. David opened the door slowly, arms raised in surrender, and gestured toward the broken window and his still dazed attackers. "They broke in," he said simply, "and we've got footage." The officers quickly separated everyone, cuffing the 2 men and Karen as they screamed protests and threats. "This is a misunderstanding," Karen cried. "I was enforcing neighborhood safety." One of the officers turned to David and Emily with a raised brow, enforcing it with hired muscle and a shattered window. Karen's face turned ghostly pale as the reality began to settle. Emily, standing beside her husband, didn't flinch when Karen was led away in cuffs. She simply crossed her arms and watched. David wrapped his arm around her, and for the first time in 2 days, they both allowed themselves to exhale. The war wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned. The events that followed were a blur of paperwork, statements, and courtroom dates. But the Harpers knew from the moment the police hauled Karen away in handcuffs that justice had finally begun to catch up with her. The footage from Rick Benson's camera, combined with Emily's hospital records and the audio from her 911 call, painted a damning picture. Karen wasn't the selfless neighborhood guardian she claimed to be. She was an unstable aggressor who had overstepped every boundary imaginable. Charges were filed swiftly. Karen faced a slew of criminal accusations: assault with a chemical weapon, trespassing, attempted unlawful entry, intimidation, and conspiracy to commit bodily harm. Her 2 hired thugs were charged with battery and destruction of private property. Karen, once the iron-fisted queen of the HOA, now found herself in an orange jumpsuit during her arraignment, pleading not guilty while the courtroom watched with quiet astonishment. Lauren Gray, the Harpers' attorney, didn't miss a beat. She moved to file a civil lawsuit against Karen and the HOA board for damages, physical, emotional, and property-related. When the HOA tried to distance itself from Karen's actions, Lauren submitted archived emails Karen had sent to board members, boasting about her disciplinary efforts against the Harpers and requesting reimbursement for community defense tools, a thinly veiled reference to her pepper spray. The HOA was implicated in enabling her behavior through negligence and silence. The trial was publicized across local news and social media. Willow Creek residents, many of whom had long grumbled about Karen's overreach, began to come forward with their own stories. Fines for minor landscaping errors, threats over parked cars, even complaints about Halloween decorations being offensive to HOA sensibilities. Karen's pattern of abuse of power was undeniable. In court, David and Emily sat together, composed and steady, as the prosecution laid out every detail. When Emily took the stand, recounting how she was sprayed while trying to help her sick child, the jury sat in stunned silence. When David described seeing his wife on the ground, blinded and crying, rage filled the room. Lauren presented Rick's video, freeze-framing the exact moment Karen raised her hand and sprayed Emily, and then again when the hired men pinned David in his own doorway. The defense tried to paint Karen as an overzealous protector of the community, but that argument collapsed the moment the jury saw her flanked by two hired goons, attempting to strong-arm her neighbors into silence and submission. The verdict came quickly. Karen was found guilty on all criminal counts. She received a 2-year suspended sentence with mandatory anger management and community service, and was barred from ever holding a position in any homeowners association again. The civil case ended just as harshly. The judge awarded the Harpers $100,000 in damages, $35,000 for medical expenses, $15,000 for property damage and legal fees, and a hefty $50,000 for emotional distress and punitive punishment. Karen's name was stripped from all HOA records. The board held a special vote the following week and unanimously elected a new president, someone calm, cooperative, and committed to rebuilding trust. Several residents came by the Harpers' home to thank them, even apologize for not speaking up sooner. As the gavel fell and the courtroom cleared, David squeezed Emily's hand, and for the first time in weeks, the weight on their shoulders lifted. They hadn't just protected their family, they had ended a reign of fear and reclaimed their peace. Weeks passed, and Willow Creek slowly returned to something resembling normal. The jagged edges Karen had left behind were beginning to smooth over, replaced by cautious optimism and, in some corners, even community spirit. For the first time in a long while, residents waved to one another without looking over their shoulders, without fearing letters in the mail or unsolicited fines for misplaced trash bins or improperly aligned holiday lights. The Harpers settled back into their rhythm. Emily's eyes fully healed, though she still flinched slightly at the hiss of an aerosol can. David worked from home more often now, finding comfort in being near his family. And Oliver, brighter than ever, returned home with his usual energy, proudly showing off his hospital wristband like a battle scar. The neighborhood kids came by in droves to welcome him back, and the Harper lawn became a playground once again, filled with laughter and racing feet. The following Saturday, the new HOA president, an easygoing schoolteacher named Amanda Lynn, hosted a neighborhood block party. There were folding tables with homemade dishes, a bounce house for the kids, and even a small local band playing acoustic covers of classic rock. David and Emily were hesitant at first, unsure if they were ready to mingle again. But as they arrived, people applauded, not out of obligation, but in gratitude. One by one, neighbors approached with kind words, quiet thank yous, and even hugs. "You gave us our voice back," Amanda told them, "and we won't forget that." Later that evening, under strands of glowing lights and the scent of barbecue in the air, Oliver tugged at his parents' sleeves. "Can we have a party too? At our house?" David grinned, exchanging a glance with Emily. "I think we just might," he said. "We've got a lot to celebrate." And so, as the sun dipped behind the treetops and laughter echoed through Willow Creek, the Harpers stood on their porch, no longer targets, no longer quiet. They were survivors, they were neighbors, and they were finally home.